Hi everyone, my name is Whitney Bausman, and I am the author of the book Partly Sunny, An Honest and Humorous Look at the First Weeks of Bringing Home a Newborn. If you are just finding us for the first time, then my hope is that you will go back in the Partly Sunny playlist and get caught up with our read-along from the beginning. And for those of you who have been with us since chapter 1, welcome back, and I'm really excited to dive back in today with chapter 8, which is called Pint-Sized Takeover. For being so very tiny, it's both amazing and humorous how newborns completely change every aspect of living. They change the way our homes physically look and logistically function. They change the way we travel and recreate and socialize. They change the way we think, make decisions, and prioritize. They even change the way we work and simply do life on a day-to-day basis. It's been a few chapters since I've prepped you with any warnings, so I think we're a tad overdue. Here's one for you. This chapter is kind of a flight of thoughts and a little all over the map, if I'm being honest. If you read it and at any point think to yourself, how on earth did we get here? Weren't we just talking about fill in the blank? Just know that you didn't miss something or zone out for a couple of paragraphs. The magical glue that holds all of what follows together: babies disrupt orderly lives, from top to bottom. When it comes to newborns, believe me when I say that nothing is sacred or safe or spared from their influence. It's all fair game. The at-home takeover. Let's begin with the overall appearance of one's home. Before we had children, Jonathan and I had some friends over for a visit shortly after we moved into our current address. They had never seen our place before, so we gave them a room-by-room tour. I had to chuckle when one of our guests, a teenager at the time, asked Jonathan and I, "Where is all your stuff?" She simply couldn't wrap her brain around the idea that we didn't have accumulated junk lying around. And it made all of us, her parents especially, laugh. Believe me when I say that having kids means having stuff, too. Come on back, Erica. Our place looks a little different these days. While yes, there is only so much that a baby actually needs, namely food, diapers, and clothing, there are so many things that are nice to have in keeping our wee ones safe, comfortable, cute, and entertained. For sleeping and napping, we're talking a crib, a bassinet, a play yard, a rocker, swaddles, and sleep sacks. For transport, it's the car seat base, and baby carrier. In the world of entertainment, you'll need a stroller, a swing, a bouncer, and an abundance of books and toys. For health and safety needs, we're talking monitors, an aspirator, a humidifier, a thermometer, soaps, balms, and medications. When it comes to feeding supplies, you may recall the slew of necessities that we already discussed a few chapters back. Lastly, there's general comfort to consider. Here, we can include the 7,001 adorable outfits that baby possesses: bibs, burp cloths, diapers, wipes, and pacifiers. Holy crap, guys. Have you ever seen one of those reality shows that looks into the life of a hoarder? Bathtubs filled with boxes, stack after stack of books, spare rooms jam-packed with who knows what from floor to ceiling, and an accumulation of so many things in general that there is literally a path to get from heap A to heap B? Well, that is so not me. If there is such a thing as an anti-hoarder, in fact, that's where I fall in the line. I despise clutter and the possession of anything that isn't serving a purpose in the worst way. Even thinking about visiting the home of a hoarder is enough to raise my blood pressure and give me a sense of ugh in my belly. Before I became a parent, it was easy to keep an orderly home, put things in their place, and avoid the presence of bulky tripping hazards. After baby? Nope. So much stuff. I suspected that life with a newborn was going to be a challenge for anti-clutter me the day of my first baby shower. Cars full of boxes and bags were piled into my living room while I sat by and looked on in amazement and sheer horror. I may have even rubbed my ever-growing bump and whispered something like, "You better be worth this, kiddo." Do you remember old Mother Hubbard? She went to fetch her dog a bone from the cupboard only to find that it was bare. You'll laugh, but my mom used to refer to me as Mother Hubbard for the scarcity of food items in my refrigerator in the era of just Jonathan and I. Back then, I bought food enough for a week. Discovering that long-lost container of once moldy, now petrified lasagna? Not at my house. Well, in the days after bringing Clark home, even my refrigerator was taken over by our new addition. Suddenly, it housed bags and bottles of breast milk and casseroles enough to feed a small army. So much of what comes with babies is simply practical, necessary stuff for survival. There's other stuff that newborns introduce into a home too, however. Stuff like footprint-adorned documents and the first teeny tiny cap placed on baby's head at the hospital. Things that I never in a million years would have held on to in my pre-child life. Sentimental stuff. I lack sentiment in the worst way. All of my loved ones know this to be true. Although I seriously appreciate kind words and encouragement from those who matter most to me, I am not a keeper of handwritten notes, cards, or mementos. If you ever give me a greeting card or a thank you note, I do, in the most sincere way, value what is written. Let it be known, however, that except for on super rare occasions, the second I'm finished reading said note, it goes in the trash can. My mom has actually stopped purchasing greeting cards for me for this very reason. On my birthday, she hands me a $20 bill and calls it a day. Before Clark, I'll admit that I was a harsh critic of tender folks like my mother-in-law who have a hard time parting ways with stuff. When I became a parent, though, I got it. Want to hear something hilarious and semi-disturbing at the same time? I, the individual who has pitched all but maybe 2 pieces of artwork from her childhood and who immediately tosses away medals and other such awards from the races she participates in, actually had an internal struggle when both Clark and Annie lost their little belly button stumps and had to dispose of the dehydrated, shriveled up, totally gross skin. Suddenly, it seemed, I went from being the wife whose much more sentimental husband has had to adopt the don't ask, don't tell policy in order to placate, to being a mom fighting herself to throw away hospital bracelets. The in-car takeover. Even though it was just the 2 of us at the time and we weren't stuff people, Jonathan and I purchased a large 7-seater SUV a few years before we had children. The thought was that we were hoping to keep this vehicle for as long as we possibly could and essentially run it to the ground. Because of this, we would still have our SUV for several years after having kids, God willing. Even though this did make practical sense to us and we stood behind our decision, there were many times when we wondered to ourselves or to one another whether or not we had gone too big and would ever come to a point of actually needing all of the space we had purchased. Well, one not even 7-pound baby later, and we already did. When Clark joined our family, even getting out of the house became a feat, in part because of all the blasted supplies that would have to go along for the ride. Suddenly, seemingly little decisions like whether or not to attend a cousin's birthday party at a nearby pizza joint weren't so little after all. Jonathan and I would have to decide whether or not it was worth it to spend the 2 years necessary to think of all the needed essentials and pack them up in the SUV we were now so thankful for, travel with a baby who would most likely fuss the entire way, and possibly be forced into isolation away from the party anyway, should a certain little one decide he was hungry. Car travel with a newborn stinks, period, just because of the mountain of crap you've got to take along. But when you have a baby who defies what everyone tells you about babies and cars, extra stinky. They told us that babies and cars simply went together. I know this certainly is true for lots and lots of babes out there, but my 2 missed out on that memo. Once, when Clark was a few days old, the Hubs and I attempted to get out of the house for a bit and visited his mom. Albeit tons of hassle to get there, the visit itself went well, and Mom B was tickled pink by our presence. After Clark finished a breastfeeding session that was just about as successful as he had ever managed and seemed to be settling down for a nap, Jonathan and I decided that it was probably a good time to plan our exit. We packed up the SUV with all of our glorious stuff yet again, got our Bambino locked and loaded, bid our farewells, and started the short 10 to 15 minute trek home. While I normally sat in the back of the car with Clark in the early days, I had decided to be brave and bold and sit like a normal adult in the passenger seat. I got duped. After only a minute or two of travel, I heard a weird gushing noise and wasn't sure what exactly was going on behind me. I calmly, just kidding, very frantically screamed at Jonathan to pull over, which he did. When we opened the door, we discovered our poor babe, his outfit, and basically the entire car seat covered in spit up. To this day, I still don't understand how Clark produced the amount of baby barf he did on that occasion, considering how very little he was taking in. Nevertheless, arriving back at home meant a long, tedious cleanup process for Clark and the car seat alike. Gobs of stuff in cars, it sucks. Pools of vomit in cars, it sucks. Know what else totally sucks in a car? Incessant baby cries. Something I've grown quite accustomed to in the past 3.5 years. A few weeks after Clark's arrival, Jonathan went out with some of his friends for a short time after work. Both of our lives were heavy on the baby stuff, and I thought he could benefit from a brief breather. Since I was hoping for a smooth, enjoyable evening myself, I stopped at the grocery store with Clark quickly to grab a few treats, ice cream and popcorn, of course. The store visit itself wasn't bad. Clark stayed in his car seat, which was perched inside of the grocery cart the whole time. He didn't really make a peep. The whole way home, though, oh, he made lots of peeps. Despite the saving grace that this particular store is close to my house, oh my Lanta, did that trip ever feel like the longest 10 minutes of my entire life. Clark screamed and screamed and screamed. Naturally, I hit every single red light and tried my best to tell Clark that we were almost home in a soothing, calm voice. My blood pressure, though, had to have been through the roof. Obviously, we survived, but I promptly stress ate the crap out of that ice cream the minute I had the chance to grab a spoon. Oh, and believe me when I say that many a pints of ice cream have been eaten in a similar manner following this inaugural event. While lots of newborns are lulled to sleep by the sounds and motions of moving vehicles, my babies hated car travel from day one. In the Bausman household, crying and car rides just sort of go together, even to this day. And before you judge me for asking for a dual-screen DVD player for my two from their grandparents this past Christmas, try reading Goodnight Moon approximately 73 times in a reassuring voice to an inconsolable infant who is tethered in a car seat and wants nothing more than freedom. Just saying. The day-to-day takeover. If you don't yet or don't ever plan to have children, I would fathom that many of your daily happenings are rather self-centered. When you get into a car, for example, you're not exactly worrying about whether or not you forgot to pack a pacifier or an extra outfit for someone else. And you aren't fretting a traffic jam in fear of a backseat driver who may or may not scream at you the entire trip. Your concerns probably look a lot more like whether or not you remembered to grab a thermos of coffee or your cell phone. Oh, and if you hit traffic, well, you're nervous about being late or running out of gas. This isn't meant as a dig or with any disrespect to those of you sans minions of the genetic type. It is more an observation, a basic truth, and a recollection of my own kid-free days. When you've got a child to consider, however, and especially a newborn, the neediest, most dependent version of a child there is, your thoughts and routines get taken over. You are no longer the priority. The priority now is the baby, and your thoughts are subject to looking more like, why are you crying? How can I get you to stop crying? Or, what can I do to keep you from crying? Some days, becoming a mom felt like someone had placed me on house arrest in a location that had recently gone from clutter-free to how many babies do you have in an instant. Instead of following a daily agenda that was created by me with myself at its core focus, my to-do list was dictated by the cries of an infant. We've touched upon it a few times already, but babies and crying are two things that oftentimes coincide. On a winning day, a baby's cries are quickly quieted with some milk, a pacifier, a cuddle, or an easily achieved nap. On a losing day, though, we're talking drastic, involved, and sometimes downright ridiculous methods of appeasement. Allowing a little one to nurse or just suckle like all day. Yep. Reinserting a rogue pacifier approximately 37 times in order for a baby to settle into a nap because the dumb thing keeps popping out? Always. Turning to odd sources of white noise or vibration to simultaneously lull your angel-turned vigilante and to drown out the mind-numbing wails. Oh yeah. Personal favorites of ours included the vacuum and the oven fan, while good friends of ours even resorted to popping their kiddo in his car seat atop the dryer. The amount of crying a baby does can vary greatly from child to child, but even easy babies are bound to cry. When you're accustomed to making independent decisions and creating your own agenda on a day-to-day basis before becoming a parent, living a life revolving around the cries of a newborn is different and challenging. Even a wee one crying for an obvious, easily remedied reason like hunger is tough. But when a babe's needs are unclear, it can easily become overwhelming. If you strip everything else away, a new parent's entire world essentially involves keeping his or her newborn from crying and/or getting the newborn to stop crying. Just a tad different than those pre-baby days, huh? The behind the desk takeover. In case you haven't caught on already, routines and normalcy sort of go out the window when a baby is added to the mix. Pre-baby norms like uncluttered homes, carefree car rides, and self-centered agendas, gone. You know what else is gone though? Monotonous, yet comfortably predictable workdays. No matter how much time a mom takes away from her typical work, stepping back from an office only to be thrown knee-deep into a life consumed by diapers, sleeplessness, endless feeding cycles, and hormonal breakdowns isn't easy. Besides the obvious differences between traditional work and parenting work, there are other more subtle things that a new parent may miss, like adult interaction and personal worth. When the visitors fizzle out, it's just you and your baby. There aren't any other adult buffers for conversation. Your baby may be the sweetest, cutest looking thing on the planet, but the level of interaction that you're going to get from an infant just isn't what you're going to get from an adult spouse, partner, colleague, relative, or friend. As much as you may want to hope or pretend that staring at your baby all day long is enough to fuel your human encounter tank, there's a pretty good chance that you'll be counting the minutes some days anyway, until you can actually speak to someone who can speak back. Then there's the matter of whether or not what you're doing is fulfilling and purposeful like it may have been in the work setting. Even if you don't like your job per se and are more than ready to say sayonara to it for 6 weeks, 12 weeks, or indefinitely, there's still a sense of task accomplishment and purpose in most paid positions. For me, when life went from administering medication that could have been fatal if dosed incorrectly to counting how many times Clark had peed in a 24-hour period, it was a much harder transition than I had anticipated. Some days I didn't feel like motherhood looked good on me, or really even worked for me. Some days there wasn't much glory, if any, in what I was doing, and it certainly didn't leave me feeling accomplished or fulfilled. Whether it be your house, your car, your daily life, or your work life, bringing home an infant alters it all. Babies introduce stuff into our homes that never existed before, they revamp the way we travel, and they completely usurp our priorities. The bad news is that these changes aren't always easy, fun, or welcomed with open arms. Real life? All of these shifts kind of suck to a degree, and some days it would be much easier to hide in a closet with a half dozen donuts than to change one more diaper, listen to one more minute of crying, or walk one more time across the living room turned obstacle course. Oh, and watching your other pull out of the driveway in a quiet, kidless car to head into work where he or she will be able to interact with other adults and maybe perform a task a tad more meaningful to society than washing poop-stained laundry, it can be downright trying. So where is the good news in all of this change? Well, while this stuff can certainly be overwhelming, most of it is transient. If you're a pregnant first-timer, you'll be amazed at just how quickly many of the baby items you purchased yourself or received as gifts become obsolete and can be put into storage or given away. There will be outfits that are worn once or twice, if ever, and the swings and bouncers and so on, some of them the baby won't even take a liking to, and all of them he or she will quickly outgrow. As far as the difficult, let's pray we make it in one piece and with our sanity intact car rides, they get a tad easier as you grow and learn your baby and all of his or her cues, routines, likes, and dislikes. I know that when you're in the thick of the newborn days, toddlerhood seems like something that is a million miles away. Rest assured that before you know it, however, that tiny car-despising little one of yours will be a fully bribable child. When your toddler is having a rough go of a car ride, or when mom is at her wit's end, toss that kiddo some crackers, a sippy cup, a book, an obnoxiously loud toy, or, let's get real because I do it all the time, even a bag full of candy for flip's sake. While I won't say that listening to crying necessarily ever becomes easy, I will say that it becomes a new norm and is at least easier. With every passing day, you and your sweetie will grow more tightly bonded, and signals for specific needs will become more identifiable to you. You'll know your baby's hunger cry versus her tired cry sooner than you think. And on those occasions, like the night Clark wailed for hours on end without apparent reason, the times you have no idea what is wrong and how you can fix it, well, you'll learn that you're more resilient than you know, that you can function on far less sleep than you've ever imagined, and if you're like me, that husbands and Jesus are made for calling upon. Ultimately, work will return if and when you want or need it to. The predictability of a workday, you can get it back. You know what you can't get back? These fleeting, tiny baby moments. Yes, there's lots of change and sacrifice and even struggle when a baby is born, but there's lots of good and beautiful stuff that is very, very temporary. Gone are the days, guys. Gone are the days of babies napping peacefully on my chest. Gone are the days when I or something I had produced was all my little one needed for nourishment. Gone, too, are the days when my child was immune to big feelings, like jealousy, worry, or loss. While there are certainly things that I'm glad to see gone, like long days and nights of infant cries, there are also things I miss. The reflex of a smile that would light Clark's face up as he finally slumbered in my arms after puddles of tears, for example, well, those smiles were enough to renew my soul for another day of parenthood, were far more weighty than my exhaustion, and were far more important than the at-home, in-car, or at-work lifestyles I had traded for this new assignment. And with that, we have reached the end of Chapter 8 of Partly Sunny. I can't believe that we are really, really close to the finish line. As always, thank you for your time. Thank you for being here. If you're already a parent, you get this chapter. You get that life before kids is altogether different than life with kids. And if you aren't a parent yet, perhaps you're pregnant or perhaps you're considering children, maybe some or all of what I said sounds a little bit frightening right now. But take heart in knowing that for all of the changes that becoming a parent brings, for all of the hard things to come, there are even more wonderful things. That was Chapter 8, and I will see you again soon for Chapter 9.